peer-to-peer lectures series presented by Taishoff Center for Inclusive Higher Education. Our topics today is peer support for inclusive in higher education. My name is Matt Taylor. This is my second semester peer-to-peer project here at Syracuse University. I would like to introduce our positionist. This is Jackie Yingling. Jackie from Advocacy Center in Rochester, New York. Yes. The next person next to her is Kathy Costello, also from Rochester, New York. Kathy is a founder of Together InclusiveU student. The next person after that person is the person over there with the nice shirt. Is
that was perfect.
Stuart Carroll, who works with Center and Communications student program at College of New Jersey. Person after that is Miss Jones, who works with special education projects at Northern Kentucky University. And we have today we have a monitor is Kathy McDonald from Fair School here at SU. And welcome to all of our guests.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. Thank you. Especially the part about Stuart's shirt.
I picked the right shirt, I think.
Before we start, I've been asked by some members of the panel if we could get an idea of who the audience is. So if you are a student here at the university, could you raise your hand? Yay! Thanks for being here. Okay, how about if you are a parent? Do we have any parents from the community here? Great. And how about if you're agency, provider agency personnel? You? And then are there any education professors or people employed at SU? Okay. Some people are wearing two hats. Okay, great. Am I missing anybody that's not in one of those categories?
Other.
The other.
Yeah, the presenters. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thanks for giving us an idea of who's out there in the audience today. My name is Jackie Yingling, and I am from Rochester, New York. And I'm here today to share a little bit of the reflections that I have about my daughter's experiences in post-secondary settings that she's been in. I am also the New York State Partners in Policymaking Training Coordinator, and I also work with a program at the University of Rochester. It's the LEND program, and I'm the Family Advocacy Discipline Coordinator for that program. So let me just grab a hold of this here. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Rachel and our quest. And I call it our quest because Rachel is 30 years old. So when she was in school and doing her secondary education, there weren't as many options. Actually, there were hardly any options for post-secondary education at that time. So it was our quest. Rachel is a charming, friendly, and very social young woman who happens to have developmental disabilities. She was included in elementary and secondary education in our neighborhood schools. So inclusion was a value that our family held. By graduation, Rachel had made lifelong friends, and those friends and she learned much more than we'll ever know. Oops. Sorry, there we go. It's a little fast. Our vision was that when Rachel graduated from high school, that she would follow along and have those same kind of experiences in a post-secondary setting. And that meant that it would be individualized, and there would be some social experiences, some vocational experiences, and some academic experiences. We also really wanted as a family to be involved with this because we felt like we knew her best, and we wanted to be involved in the planning and the evaluation of the experience. And silly us, we were hoping for some sort of a partial tuition waiver or tuition agreement. I don't know why we ever thought that happened. So, our quest began way before Rachel graduated from high school. We started when she was probably in 9th and 10th grade when we're talking about transition statements. And Rachel's transition statement consisted of very simply a few words: I want to go to college with my friends. And so we, Rochester, New York, I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but there are many public and private institutions of higher education that are well known and very good colleges and universities. My husband and I approached every college and university within 30 miles of our home, which is approximately 9 or 10 institutions. And every one of them said no. Some of them more pleasantly than others. But we were told things like, we don't have a place for your daughter here. And our most pleasant rejection came from an administrator at a local community college, and he said to us, I hope you find an appropriate placement for your daughter. So that was very telling. And I think the piece that really got to us was that these administrative professionals could not see beyond the academic aspect of the experience. They were focusing only on the benefits to their burden that it would cause for the other students, and not the benefits that the institution could gain or the other students. We were lucky enough that our school district did support our efforts somewhat, but they were limited in that they didn't know how to support us. There were if there was a program out there that they could have bought into, they would have gladly done that, but there wasn't at that time. So they suggested the only thing that they knew, and that was a program of what I call the program of 12, 12 students there. And it was on a local campus, and it was kind of a segregated setting, kind of like a special ed kind of program. There were some very, very good things that came out of that program. Rachel had a college ID, and that made her feel like she belonged. She was able to say, I go to college. The ID allowed her access to the gym, to the cafeteria, to the library. So really good things. When she looks back on the experience, she thinks positively. They're good people. But there are some real drawbacks to that situation. And one of the biggest was that there was limited interaction with peers without disabilities. Very limited. Sometimes students would come in and help out, but it didn't happen often, and there were no relationships built. The other piece was that there was no auditing of classes. This was a very prestigious higher education institution, and they could not fathom having a student with a disability in their classes. Though we tried valiantly for 2 years to make this happen. And there was a huge focus on life skills, which for Rachel, she could never generalize out of the classroom. So that really wasn't a good plan for her to do that every day. The biggest problem, I think, with that program is that there is no plan for what happens after. So there are good things about that. I'm grateful we were able to participate in that, but there were some drawbacks. And while we were in that program, we never stopped the quest and investigating other places. So this is how we entered into the program of one. We happened to, with all of our investigation, find a champion, which was really important. And we found a professor who was an education professor at one of the local colleges. And he helped us find a professor of children's literature who was willing to have Rachel in her class, so we signed her up and we audited. We didn't go to the university and ask for permission, we just signed her up, and we knew we had permission from the instructor already. He arranged for a student in his education class to work with Rachel as a mentor and help her with the coursework. And then she was to write a paper, so it was a credit requirement for her. She was able to, it was a win-win situation, facilitated by Bud. And also, he arranged for some initial communication to take place with that college for things that would happen. And at that time, we also had a college that was 2 miles away where there was a student who provided support for Rachel in other programs that she had been in. And we paid for her to have Rachel stay overnight in her dorm room. I think for about 6 months, every Monday night, Rachel would sleep on an air mattress on the floor in Bethany's room. So that was really kind of unique. I don't think, if we had approached the college and asked for that to happen, you can imagine what would have been said. So we were kind of like under the radar. We were doing these experiences without anybody really knowing that we were doing these experiences. So we had Bridget at one school helping her with the coursework. We had Bethany at another school doing lots of social experiences with her. And they were all great and valuable experiences. However, as you can imagine, there are significant problems with programs of one. The pros are that we had some really nice natural supports with Bridget, her friend Tinker, this guy that she knew. They introduced her to lots of people on campus, and there are lots of really good, valuable experiences. But the challenge was we were it. We were the total program. We were the total package. The funder, the support coordinator, the consultant teacher, the transporter, that's it. We were it. We were the backup. And this can be a costly package for families. And we probably spent maybe $5,000 to $7,000 on these experiences for Rachel. And you might say, well, that's a parent's job to pay for their child's education. But when I pay for my other daughter's education, I expect an outcome. And I expect that outcome to be competitive employment and the ability to pay back loans. And I had no guarantee that that would happen with Rachel. So I think it's a big barrier for families, a program of one, and doing the funding all on your own. And of course, transportation is huge too. And it's really not cool all the time that your parents drop you off and go to events. So there are some significant challenges. While she was at the program of one, we were working on a collaborative model for the program of three. We kept planning, and we met other families who had the same interests, and eventually we entered into this agreement with a private agency, our state disability services office, and 2 other families. And we now had Rachel in a program of 3. One of the really wonderful things that happened in this program of 3 is that the agency, the private agency, provided support staff for this to happen. And one of the persons that they hired happened to be Kristen. Kristen grew up across the street from us. And Kristen was in Rachel's brownie troop. And in this picture, Kristen is the little girl with blonde hair, and Rachel's the little girl wearing the brownie beanie. And they were together in the brownie troop. And they went to school together. And then the picture on the right is Kristen as support staff for Rachel before class started. They're going over their notes. And Kristen was paid support for Rachel. And it was really very nice since they knew each other. On the right in that picture is Katie. Katie was a volunteer for the agency. She was a sibling. Her brother had developmental disabilities. And she was asked by the agency to do her volunteer work with Rachel and Kristen. So she was in natural support, she was unpaid, and she was really good because she understood the situation, had the familiarity. was really a glorious few months. It was just, the problem with that is that it didn't last. And their lion is the problem with the program of the collaborative model. Using agency supports can often be difficult because the staff are transient, and it's hard because there's such staff turnover. Rachel had probably 4 or 5 different support people within a year or a year and a half. Another big issue is having to defend and justify. We never really gained support from the top down at that institution of higher ed. The provost and the college administration did not really support the effort, and therefore there's no buy-in from the professors. So it's hard to find courses that would fit. When Rachel looks back at all of her experiences, she has a really positive outlook on it, but you can see that the things that meant the most to her were the things that she did with her friends, the peers, hanging out, going to the library, learning how to buy a snack, and really using them as role models. One of her favorite things to do when things stopped moving.
No more clicker?
Nope, not advancing. Let's see. One of her, I'll just keep going. One of her favorite things to do was to be with her friends at the cafe to get coffee, just like any other college student would like to do. And one of the biggest hurdles or obstacles to our success, and Rachel's success and the other students, was that the administration could not look beyond the students as being the burden. They could not listen to their own students. And I have a couple of quotes from their own students who wrote these letters in support of the program. One was from Tinker, the young man who was Bridget's friend, and he said, "Rachel is truly an amazing woman. She has not only impacted me, but our entire community. Rachel breaks through stereotypes. She's exactly what we need at this school. She will widen students' perspectives and make a difference in our community." Another student, "Having Rachel on campus has impacted my life greatly. I look at my environment with a new perspective. She has played a huge part in my decision to go into special education. On campus, Rachel has a huge network of friends. Wherever we go, there's always someone we know. Our campus would not be the same without Rachel around." And lastly, this is from Bridget. "I began working with Rachel in October 2004. I wasn't sure what to expect from this opportunity, but I was excited about the challenge of working with someone with a disability. In the past several months, I'd come to know Rachel very well. In the beginning, it was almost like a job for me, and I thought it was my job to help her. However, as Rachel and I became friends, this no longer became a job, but my favorite part of the week." If only they had listened to the students. College has now gone into an agreement with 2 school districts, and we were told that our 3 young adults could no longer attend and do any kind of vocational or academic experiences there. So they've created a program of 12 at that school, which is, I don't think there's much inclusive activities happening there. Peer relationships, we know that they're important. We know that's what college is really about. So now we're going to focus the rest of our time here on how to develop and strengthen those relationships. Thanks.
Thank you.
We did a lot of research with our students on the benefits that they perceived of working with the CCS students.
Yeah. I got hundreds of mentoring reflections that I still have to analyze, but it's been great.
We have this paper
Oh,
has a lot of that.
I'll have to look at that on the. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, 2009.
It's not all interviews. Interviews, mostly interviews. Actually, all interviews goes into focus groups. Interviews, release their student work, or to interview the other students.
Excellent. Excellent.
It's great. Yeah. Oh my God, some of the stuff is so good. I I used to present on that, so it's funny how you see these things evolve over the years. But I did
Well,
a few presentations
my name
on
is
that stuff.
Kathy Costello. I'm also a parent of a student, well, now he's a young adult with a developmental disability who also had the same experience on the campus as Rachel did. And I'm also the TIES program director at the Advocacy Center in the same agency that Jackie works at in Rochester, New York. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Kevin and how that morphed into starting TIES and how we moved on to providing support for students with developmental disabilities in elementary and high school to college-age students. So Kevin also was involved in the same experience as Rachel at St. John Fisher College. He audited several classes there. And although the agency provided adult support for Kevin, Kevin pushed that adult support away and wanted to be involved with his peers on campus. So that happened very naturally for him and very successful. The peers on campus were drawn to Kevin, and as he was drawn to them, he wanted to move that adult out of the classroom, which eventually did happen, and he sat with his peers, and they took him after class to do projects, to do work as he developed the program. Kevin was very active in his high school years through a program called TIES, which stands for Together Including Every Student. And through TIES is a program which provides support for students and young adults with developmental disabilities in any kind of extracurricular, community, or recreational activity. So students who aren't attending activities because they don't have support to do so, or are attending activities within their schools and community with the support of an adult, such as a teacher or a paraprofessional, can now go with a trained student volunteer from their own community. So the model of TIES was myself and another parent, and Kevin wanted to be involved in everything since he was in 3rd grade. So I became his Boy Scout leader, school of religion teacher, anything he wanted to do, which really became a barrier for him because none of the other students wanted to interact with him because his mother was always there. So I used to say to my student volunteers, imagine going to a school dance with your mother. Who would ever want to go again? So we researched funding through the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. They were looking for ideas of inclusive recreation. We had our grant accepted, and we started TIES working with our 2 school districts in 2 suburbs of Rochester, New York. And the model was to work with students with disabilities from 3rd grade through age 21 and recruit volunteers 8th grade and older to support students in anything they chose to do in their communities and schools. So I worked with initially those 2 school districts. Now TIES is in 32 school districts. But we saw as these students were transitioning into college age, the next natural extension was to have TIES on college campuses. So since our 3 students that were in the program that Jackie talked about had all been involved in TIES in their school districts in high school, we thought we would create that extension at the college they were attending. So there was a student on campus who we hired as a TIES coordinator, St. John Fisher College student, and she became the TIES coordinator, and she recruited her friends, trained them to provide support for the students on campus at anything they chose to do after the school day or during lunch. They sat with their peers. They went to football games at night, basketball games. Kevin actually really liked when they had the bands come and the movie nights, so they were in and off campus several times a week with peers from their college. It was a very, very exciting more of TIES, but also the word got out in our community that it was successful. And there is another college near Rochester called SUNY Geneseo, and they have a class there for students with disabilities in the transition age out of high school and older. And the professor of that class actually contacted me and said, we're really interested in having TIES part of our group here so these students can get support outside the school day. So luckily, one of my volunteers from my community was going to SUNY Geneseo, and she herself said this is a great idea. She recruited her friends. She wrote a proposal, which is a very difficult thing to do, which I never do. Knew that getting a proposal written and getting it approved by the college board took 1.5 years. She faced a lot of resistance. She grew a lot during that process, but they passed it, and she formed a TIES club, which is still functioning. She graduated last year, and she already prepped 2 juniors to take over her position when she left, and they're doing the same thing this year so that that club can stay in existence for those students. But we also have school districts with our original model of ties in Geneseo and surrounding communities that can come on campus with student volunteers that are 18, 21 years old, that can really be with their peers instead of going to something at their high school. So then, at one of our events, this TIES has a program called Outrigger Canoeing, where we draw from all school districts and teach students and volunteers come together to learn skills in outrigger canoeing. The mother of one of my volunteers came one night to drop her off, and she happened to be a professor at SUNY Brockport, and said, love this TIES model. How about when we talk and get something on SUNY Brockport campus together with my class? So we worked together great. Her name's Jen. She had to meet the criteria for service learning. So teaching and learning strategy, integrating meaningful community service with instruction, and have the students reflect about their experience. The criteria fit perfectly for TIES. She teaches an intro to special education class, so not all the students are necessarily going into special education, but this is an elective course that they could take. She had 27 students, so I was invited in to explain TIES, to go ahead and train all the student volunteers. We have a training program in place for TIES volunteers. And then their job was to work together as a class. This was part of their, integrated into their curriculum, and come up with activities on the campus that students with disabilities could be invited to attend with the support of peers from that campus. SUNY Brockport, as far as I know, don't have students currently with developmental disabilities attending or auditing classes, but we have a lot of students in surrounding communities. The Brockport School District is in walking distance of SUNY Brockport, so we were inviting older students that really wanted to have some college flavor onto the campus, and they were organizing activities. So the inclusive part of it came to when we had 27 volunteers split up into 10. They came 4 times, and we had probably 12 students with disabilities coming on campus, they had 4 activities set up and choosing an activity they'd like to do, and having the support of a volunteer. And I'm going to read you some of these quotes. So the student learning outcomes for this class was collaborate with your peers. Some of the feedback I received from the students when I got back in, they would sit at a desk and the table and work alone. They never even, the students that were SUNY Brockport students, never would talk to each other in class. They as a group had to become collaborators and work together to make this happen. Interacted with the TIES participants and collaborated with myself, their professor, and people from the community to make this happen. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. We had 4 sessions. They were an hour and a half long, and the students had different stations. One was a costume, arts and crafts. We as TIES, part of TIES is the TIES coordinator provides support information for the student volunteers. They know how to best support the student when they're with them. One of the comments we got back, though, when I went back to the class and asked for their feedback, because this was the very first time that we did this, to be really close. Connecting with all these kids and getting them to know them as more than just a disability. They said to me, I'd rather not have the support information the first time I meet the child, because I really want to get to know them and not their disability. And the students that attended these activities were students that in the natural course of their school day or at home presented challenging behaviors for their families and schools. The students saw none of that, and if they did see that, the transition to naturally change the activity that they were doing so those students felt successful was extremely natural. One of the students said, TIES helped me to understand that there will always be struggles when being a professional teacher. There will be students who learn easier than others, those who learn at the average level, and those who learn a little slower than others. However, no matter how hard the struggle may be, the outcome, happiness, and success of the students will always make it worthwhile. And I'll read one more quote. I had such a great experience with the students from TIES and with my peers in the classroom. Rather than going all semester not knowing much about those that sat next to me or across the room from me, I got to know them. I'm a pretty shy person, and when it comes to working with peers in the same class that I am in, TIES helped to open that gap to where I began to feel more comfortable around those in the class. helped me to make me feel more comfortable to speak in class and not feel as if everyone was judging the opinions that I had. As the semester went on, it was easier to work with those both in the same group as me and in different groups for the TIES activity. These students are very genuine and so smart. I know that working with kids is what I'm supposed to be doing now and what I've done. And one of the questions was, what was most meaningful to you? I felt like we were all making a difference. It felt rewarding, and I have art on my refrigerator from G and V. We are continuing this experience with SUNY Brockport, so this semester we're working with a whole new class that Jen has. And the students that were involved last semester were all trained as TIES volunteers, so they can go back to whatever community they're from and provide support for a student in their own community, which is the win-win for that. So natural support is chosen and preferred and has definitely proven successful in including people of all abilities. Thank you.
We're going to attempt to shut down and restart.
Dee,
Yeah.
what if people perhaps had questions of the first two presenters?
That's actually a good idea if anybody has any questions so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
I like it all the way.
Oh, did Missy come up
It was
with it?
Missy's idea.
Thanks for taking credit.
It's okay.
Here's
like
a cool shirt, you know, and he's got this all under control.
Oh.
Story of my life. It's okay.
Thank
Sort of
you.
mine,
I don't
too.
care.
I was like,
Thank you very much for beginning to share your own experiences and the work that you've been doing to break down barriers and create opportunities. Since we're having a few moments of technical difficulties, let's see if we have any questions or comments from the audience. I'll come around with the mic, just move your body or make a noise and let me know, and I'll come around with the microphone.
This question actually is for Jackie. Sorry, Jackie, not to surprise you. When you did get funding through an agency for what you call the program of 3, what kind of funding did you use?
In our state, it was funding through OPWDD, which is the Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. However, at that time, it was it had a different name, which you might know as OMRDD, and it was an OPS plan. It was a 5-year grant that was for agencies to work with families and individuals with disabilities. And so we went into that process knowing that it was a program that would fund for 5 years, and we had hoped to enter that kind of relationship with the college that we were working with too. In New York State, the OPS plans were defunct after 2 or 3 years. They decided to go into a different funding model. And so at that point, we were grandfathered in to complete our 5-year cycle, but there was no more funding under that plan.
And then
Does that
did you
answer?
switch to a new funding model, or are you still under the OPS model?
No, the OPS model ended. The agency provided supports, and we went to, when we left that situation with the program of 3, when the college entered into an agreement with the school districts, the agency supported our efforts to go to a community college, and then we ran into other barriers of trying to build peer relationships on a community college campus that was about 40 minutes from our home. So it didn't work out as well, but the agency did stick with us for the entire 5-year OPS plan. And unfortunately, the state no longer funded plans like that. However, there are new options for, hopefully, for individualized programs like that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there other questions or comments?
And we seem to be back cooking
Oh.
with gas.
Oh.
Kathy, thank you so much for
Stalling.
I'm sure everybody will say that in terms of peer supports, flexibility is key. That's why we have undergraduates do that. So, Stuart, please.
New batteries, new life.
Can I go here?
Alright, wait, there's the clicker here, or should I, don't use the
Oh,
clicker?
well, actually, should work now.
Clicker was the problem. You can just
Okay, so I do that.
There you
Got it,
go.
alright. Hi, so I'm Stuart Carroll from the College of New Jersey. I'm actually a professor of elementary and early childhood ed with no background in special education whatsoever. But when our program was started in 2006, and there was some preliminary work done before that, I just was very intrigued by it and thought, oh, I have to get into this stuff. So I got onto the curriculum committee, and my involvement is largely in the curriculum that we offer for the students with intellectual disabilities in our program. And I'm going to focus on the inclusive academic experiences that they have as part of the program. It is very much a program. Students come in and they become part of the Career and Community Studies program. There is a certificate at the end of 4 years of study. It's tuition driven. So it's not as individualized as some of the models that we've heard about and that you hear about in general. But there are over 220 of these kinds of programs out there, and I think we are still in the let 1,000 flowers bloom stage, so I think it's really interesting to hear about what everybody is doing. The programs are always very, did that work? Now it works, okay. The programs are very geared to the institutions where they are housed. And we are a liberal arts college. Well, I say that, and I'm in the School of Ed, and a huge number of our students are education majors, so we are not a liberal arts college, but many of my colleagues think we are. No, but we are a liberal arts college with lots and lots of education majors. Our students are, really, really, for the most part, nice kids. Sorry, it's such an awful way to put it. But they, it's a wonderful student body, and that's we have a big emphasis on general education. So all of those things have shaped the way that the CCS program looks. It's not hard for us to get students who want to interact with the students with intellectual disabilities on campus. That has not been a terrible struggle. Sometimes it's work, but it's never been a struggle. Our faculty have been very open to it. And often when people ask me about this, that's their first question is, well, how do you get the professors? And it's like, it hasn't been that much of a fight. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So our program does have quite an emphasis on liberal learning, general education, as well as life skills and the social side of it. I'm not going to talk that much about the social side of it. I could, because that's, of course, hugely important. I can stick with this. I don't attempt fate. And of course, employment outcomes. We do all of that, but I'm going to be focusing, again, because I'm on the curriculum committee, so my interest is a lot in the academics of the thing. I listed, and this is actually only a partial list of the inclusive academic experiences that students have over their 4 years, but I'll mention these quickly. Some of them I'll tell you more about later. Every freshman who comes to the college does a first seminar. I think the word freshman isn't used so much anymore. Well, I don't know, they still say it. First seminar, and there is a first seminar called Human Abilities Unplugged, which is sort of a disability studies course. And all of the incoming CCS students, the first year group of CCS students, take that first seminar as well. So in that class there are 15, there's typically 15 students, 15 to 18 students, but there'll be 15 typically enrolled students plus all 10 of the students from the CCS program. So it is indeed an inclusive experience. The proportions are not natural at some level, but it's a great first experience for the CCS students of being in a college class with other students. And other students who are naturally very interested in being with them because they've opted to take, there's 80 different first seminars. So, if you've opted to study Human Abilities Unplugged, you have some interest. So, there's a human development course that's on a similar model in their second semester as freshmen. There's a collaboration course that our master's students take, that the CCS students take as well together with them in a similar. Actually, there's 2 sections, so you might have 5 of the CCS students in one section and 5 in the other. So it's not quite the whole group together, which is a good thing. The Great Conversations course is, again, a class where all the CCS students are together, but a large number of secondary ed majors are also in that class. I'll talk about that more. That's my baby. So is Finer Things, which Great Conversations focuses more on the arts and sciences and humanities. Finer Things is more about the arts. And then starting in the sophomore year, the first semester of the sophomore year, the CCS students start to audit typical TCNJ classes. Usually one class per semester. The students who enjoy the typical classes or want to do more academics can audit 2. We have had one student who audited 3 classes in the semester, but that's only once and only one student. So, so every student does a fair number of, I'll talk about those classes as well. I already told you quite a bit about the first seminar, but it's been a great opportunity for us to figure out how to teach inclusively at the post-secondary level. I mean, even for my colleagues who have a lot of special ed background, they had never done this. So a lot of work with groups, a lot of work with trying to find what the big important ideas are. And in fact, some of our professors who've had one student in their class have said, this was really good for me. I mean, it's one of my favorite quotes. This was really good for me because it forced me to think about what really matters in my course. So for all of us, it's been an interesting thing to try to figure out what the important ideas are. The assignments are very inclusive. There are a lot of movies, a lot of film studies in that freshman seminar. The students will typically go to the freshman dorm and watch the movie together with the other freshmen, and then do assignment reaction kinds of assignments. And that's that one. Now, the way Great Conversations works, it's, of course, that the students do in the first semester of their sophomore year. No, I'm wrong on that. The second semester of their freshman year, excuse me on that. And it's meant to be an introduction to the various academic disciplines and to the great conversations that people have when they talk about those disciplines, which is where the name comes from. So it's done in 2-week modules on various liberal arts and science topics, always emphasizing the big ideas in those topics. I'm very delighted, you must have figured this, Justin Friedman, who is a doc student here at Syracuse, was at TCNJ, and probably you developed your interest in special ed because of involvement with the CCS program.
That's right.
Yeah, but which happened to quite a few of our secondary ed majors who came to this class. Well, actually, you never came to Great Conversations, but Justin did teach a module about the war in Vietnam, the history of the war in Vietnam, with a big emphasis on the impact of popular culture, media studies, a lot of big ideas worked in there. So, it's been very, very interesting. A lot of the secondary ed majors point out how much they learn from these 2-week modules. And sometimes, it's like, if it's in their discipline, it's like, oh, so that's why that's important. That's why we do that when we're teaching social studies. The secondary ed majors who are there, they are attending as it's one of their practicum options. In their psychology of learning class, there are a number of possible practica that they can do, and this is one of their options. We didn't start out that way. Originally, I recruited students to come to the class. I would go to every student government, every organization, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore because I was on campus like 4 nights a week going to meetings. I think there was something kind of amazing about that period because we would have 10 or 12 typically enrolled students from all across the campus coming to these classes and learning so much and getting, they weren't getting any benefit for it. And it wasn't a practicum, it wasn't something, it didn't count for anything except for learning and for having the opportunity to learn together with students with intellectual disabilities. One of the things I really stress in that class, when I do have one meeting with the secondary ed majors or anyone else who's coming to explain to them about the class, and I tell them, you're not a TA. You are not a helper. You are a student. Come and learn. Now, I also tell them, you're a really good student. and you participate actively in every activity, and you make sure if you're in a group that everyone in your group is participating. that's the way that you're helping, but you're not a teacher. And it's been pretty amazing. I've learned a lot about inclusive teaching. And I work with elementary teachers, so it's taught, really, it's helped all of us. And the secondary ed majors, can go on and on. We do have some papers, I've got a slide later of some of our publications, but the secondary ed majors really love being in the course. Some of them will say that it's been the highlight of their college career, the most meaningful experience. And these aren't people who necessarily had much of an interest in disability or, anyways, it benefits them in many, many ways. For the typical TCNJ classes, students audit these classes, they choose, we put out a handbook of classes that's a miniature version, classes that don't have a lot of prerequisites. There's certain classes that would not be very appropriate. A third-year engineering class might not work. But we have had students take classes from every school, including engineering, more into the tech end of it, including nursing. We've had students in classes from every school. Over 90 different professors have had a CCS student in their class. The professors, they vary in how they think about it. Some of the professors are willing to work very hard to adapt, and they're always asking questions, and they're really engaged. And some of them feel like, well, the program will take care of it. They don't want to do it, but that's fine. If they're willing. We typically send a mentor. We have a lot of mentors involved. I'd better talk about that further. There are a lot of students who work as mentors for the program, and one of the things that they do is go to the classes together with the students, the classes that they're auditing. If a student doesn't need a mentor there, the mentor won't come. They don't have to have it. If there are natural supports, which does happen, sometimes a student in the class, I know this happened a few times, a student in the class would turn to the mentor and say, what are you doing here anyways? You're not taking this class, are you? And the student will say, well, no, I'm here to help so-and-so taking this class. And the student will say, I'll do that. Why are you wasting your time? But although I have to say, a lot of the mentors love auditing these classes. Like for them, they're getting to take classes and things they never would have taken. So they don't hate it. Okay. How many minutes was that a signal? Oh, all right, I'm laughing. Well, then, let me tell you about mine. We don't do a lot of faculty training. We don't expect that the faculty are going to spend a lot of time. As I said, sometimes the professors surprise us by how into it they are. And sometimes, it's not that they disappoint, but sometimes their attitude is, I'm not going to do anything. But luckily, we do have a wonderful crew of mentors. Right now, let me see if I get my numbers right. I think we have 81 students who are doing some mentoring for the program. Some of it, I'm focusing today on academic mentoring, some of it is social mentoring, so, some of it is employment, job coaching. So there's all kinds of mentoring. Of those 81 students, 25 of them are getting paid something as a student work, and the rest are volunteers. So the student have to agree to do 3 hours of mentoring as a volunteer, and if you're going to do it as a student worker, it's 8 hours. So, but again, as I say, it hasn't been hard to find students to do it. They come from all across the college. We had an incredible mentor who was a finance major, and we put him in touch with people who do, finances for people with intellectual disabilities, the hope that this new interest of his might lead to an interesting career opportunity. And so we have across the college a lot of ed majors, but not just. Okay. And then I just tried to do a list of the kinds of things that the TCNJ students, and I guess it's coming back to this argument, if you're ever having a resistant provost and you're trying to make the case that what do the typical students get from having these kinds of programs on their campus, from having students with intellectual disabilities there, obviously opportunities for instruction, like I mentioned that Justin actually taught a module on the Vietnam War, opportunities to tutor, to learn about tutoring, opportunities to design curriculum in partnership with professors. We're working right now on a module about creative thinking and creative problem solving, which is a stretch for me. But I've got 2 student workers I'm working with, and we're all learning from that. Helping with studying, well, especially for the students who are becoming education majors, it's a great opportunity to see how a student is actually thinking when they're trying to learn. note-taking students are doing in classes, a lot of pre-teaching in the Human Abilities Unplugged class and in the Human Development class. Pre-teaching is scheduled, and the students actually help with the pre-teaching. And of course, the professors always say that the only students who ever answer their questions are the students in the CCS program. Like, they'll be staring out at blank faces, and there'll be like 8 CCS students with their hands up. So the pre-teaching seems to be very effective. Students help with adapting assignments. A lot of the professors will turn to our mentors to help them with adaptations. Facilitating in-class interactions. So you know, if there are group situations and the CCS student wants to participate more and isn't being able to, then they can help with that. So the mentors can help, or fade if they don't have to help. And being classmates and being group members together in inclusive classes is a great opportunity for them as well. So that's pretty much, well, I mean, they get so much out of it. And there's just a list of publications, which is available on our website, and then just through our web address on here for what it's worth. But we do have a lot of materials up there, so we'd love you to come visit. And I haven't talked much about the benefits to the CCS students themselves. I think, you know, being engaged in those great conversations and really developing depth in different academic areas, it is a life skill. And they emerge with it. And interactions with other students that are around meaningful and deep and important content, and not just around the kinds of things that we talk about when we're hanging out, because when we're hanging out, we do eventually start to talk sometimes about important things, sometimes. so it makes the CCS students more able to participate in that kind of conversation. So that's it.
Hi, I'm Missy Jones, and I'm a professor at Northern Kentucky University. And you're kind of thinking, like, what? Where did they get this woman? And if you aren't aware, Northern Kentucky University is about 25 minutes away from the University of Cincinnati, if you've heard of that one, or Xavier University. Anybody into sports, you might have heard about some of those. We're really close to there. We're right over the river. I actually live in Ohio, teach in Kentucky, so it's all relative. And at Northern Kentucky University, it's about 16,000 students, so it's, you know, middle of the road, not the biggest, not the smallest public institution, and, you know, with a variety of all kinds of majors. And one of the things that I wanted to just touch on in connection to what some of the other folks have said is that when we started really meaningfully including individuals with intellectual disabilities on campus, it started with one student and one parent who found one champion on a college campus. And so it doesn't have to be something that costs a lot of money. If you can't find a program around, there is a way to get things started. So everything I'm going to talk about today started with one student, one parent, and one champion. And I use the word champion because that's what people call it. I don't consider myself a champion. But you have to find someone on campus, and usually you can find them in, like I'm in teacher education, and I'm a professor of special education, but it could be in nursing or social work or counseling or psychology or rehab or disability studies. It could be from lots of different places. You just have to find that one person who's willing to give it a shot. And under the radar is always a great place to start, and grassroots is always a great place to start. You don't want to end there, but it's an okay place to start, I think, in some ways. So don't get disappointed if you're thinking about programs for families who can't seem to find access to something. You can make it happen. At NKU, we have students with intellectual disabilities who are fully included on campus as non-degree seeking students. And we have a non-degree seeking option. We always did. We didn't create it for a program. It just was there. And when we discovered that it was there, we thought, ooh, now we can point, you know, the lights and the arrows to this door and say, enter here. This is one way you can do it. So we just found a way in that was already available on our campus. So if any one of you would want to come to NKU and take a course in photography or do something, you know, you could do that as a non-degree seeking student. We have continuing ed. That's separate. What we really were trying to do is think about ways that students could be considered matriculating students on campus, although they're non-degree seeking. Most of the students that we have, we're limited to 6. at any given year, and students take up to 30 semester hours. So we'll have 6 students, and then the next year, we'll, once one person's graduated, I can have one more come on. So it's very small, and I don't have any aspirations to make it any bigger, because it's an inclusive program, and what we're really striving for in the Commonwealth of Kentucky is to have more colleges and universities having students with intellectual disabilities having access on campus. So it's not about everybody coming to NKU, it's about creating access across the state so you can go to the college or university that matches you, that fits you, that's not about a particular program. So we're really trying to keep it that way. Students can take up to 30 semester hours, and they typically take about 3 to 6 credit hours a semester. And I often encourage them to take one course that might have more academic work to it, with lots of papers and lecture and all the typical kind of stuff that you find on college campuses. And then balance it out with a class that might be more hands-on, like a dance class or theater or a sports course or something, that if they have an interest in that. Not required to do that, all of that's done on an individual basis. But what I was asked to talk about really today is the types of supports that we provide to students who are on campus and what that looks like. So I do want to talk just real quickly about what peer mentoring is. We call them mentoring partnerships, a little bit about the training that we provide, how the mentoring plans are developed, university collaboration, natural supports, and some common concerns, because I think that's an important thing to talk about. If you understand what the barriers are, you can be proactive and upfront and address those barriers. So the first thing is this idea of mentoring partners. And we call it a partnership, and we are really intentional about that because it's a reciprocal relationship, sort of symbiotic. Everybody benefits from it. It's not one person giving their all to somebody else, and somebody's always the giver and someone's always the receiver, because that's not a partnership. It's about both recognizing that everybody's going to benefit from the experience. There's some way to gain from that experience. So we have to really intentionally think of ways to make that happen. We help our mentoring partners to understand what each role is. Now, for the purpose of the slide, I'm going to say what a mentor is and what a mentee is, but we rarely call it that. We talk about mentoring partners, but just for conversation's sake today. And so we make sure that everybody understands that when someone is a mentor, they're a friend, an ally, a co-planner, study partner, facilitator, social companion, they're all these things. They're a friend. There's somebody there to hang out with, to learn alongside with, and to partner with. So they're considered to be an equal partner. Now, a mentor is not a surrogate parent, and a mentor is not the one ultimately responsible to make sure that the person is totally successful in their academic work. I have mentoring partners who, when they first start, oftentimes take so much responsibility for the success of the person in the partnership. And we have to tell them, if the person doesn't get their paper turned in, that's on them. That's not on you. And you just kind of say, okay, what's the next thing we can? How can we make it better next time? How can we try to help support that person? But if they don't do well, it's not on you. It's their success. They own their success and they own their lack of success. But we can try to support and try to help people to be successful when possible. We're not an answer key. We're not a counselor or a therapist, a dictator or cruise director. And you get all kinds of personalities of people that want to do mentoring. I always tell them, if you're trying to earn your place in heaven, this isn't a job for you. It's not about that, okay? It's about being a friend. Again, the mentee, you notice the list? If you remember the list what a mentor was, it's the exact same list. They're a friend and ally, a co-planner, a study partner, all of those same things. And then, of course, a mentee is not a child, a charity, a client, a stereotype, or a project. And that's always somewhat of a hard balance, because actually my mentors do volunteer, but they volunteer and earn service lettering credit towards courses that they're taking. Most of them are special ed majors, some of them are education majors. I don't need to branch out beyond that because I only have 6 students, and we don't need to try to advertise and get 100 mentors. I don't need 100 mentors. That would be claustrophobic. Nobody wants 100 mentors hanging on. They're like, get off. I don't need that. So, we have to keep it small. And again, that makes it, I think, more natural and more helpful. At least that's the hope. We do provide some mentor training, but in the mentor training, both sets of mentoring partners come to the training because the people who are receiving the mentoring support are people who are the most experienced with mentoring because they've been receiving that mentoring support semester after semester, and oftentimes we get mentors who are first-timers each semester. The people who have had the experience with mentoring can actually share what it is that they need, what do they like, what do they want mentors to do, what do they not want mentors to do, what's not a good mentor. They can paint that picture for folks before they even start engaging in a mentoring partnership. So we really try to make sure that from the very get-go, from that first day, everybody understands that each person can be a resource given what the topic of the situation is. So really try to set that up from day one. One of the things that, it's kind of a silly requirement, but because it's part of a service learning, we have 2 different courses that we offer this service learning opportunity. And it's an opportunity. You don't join into a collaborative relationship forcefully. You have to do it voluntarily. So if you don't want to do mentoring, you choose another option. And we always make sure we have other options for people to do. But if mentoring's your thing, if you think that's how you want to learn and how you want to engage, then you can do that, and we'll start with this mentoring training. But one of the requirements for mentoring, I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but I absolutely require that every person engaged in a mentoring partnership have fun. There has to be evidence of smiling. There has to be evidence of laughter. There has to be evidence of doing fun stuff. You can't just tutor. And we make sure that our mentoring partners, the way we organize it, never are just tutors. Tutoring might be there might be an academic component to mentoring, but if that's what you do, then you've already set yourself up for an unequal relationship. There's not parity or equality in that relationship. So it's really important from our perspective and what we do that no one is ever just an academic mentor, that there's always a fun piece. And we try to have that fun piece happen early on in the mentoring relationship, because it's through that fun that you recognize the similarities among college students, instead of already starting out as looking at what those differences are. So if I can look at those similarities and I can recognize that you like Saturday morning cartoons and you like to sleep in late and you love to run outside and I love to do all those things too, and you want a boyfriend and I want a boyfriend, and we suddenly see the sameness, and we get that somebody has a sense of humor, and we understand suddenly all of the abilities that a person has. But it comes through fun, not through a tutoring kind of relationship. So I actually require fun. I know it sounds goofy, but they have to figure out where that fun's going to come from. I don't tell them how to have fun, but they have to figure out, given their common interests, what they've discovered about one another, what are some fun things they can do together, and they have to actually plan that and do that early on in the relationship. Now, as part of the mentoring training, remember everybody's in the room together when I can make that happen. Logistically, it doesn't always happen. I'm making it sound a whole lot better than the reality of the world is. But we really take some time to do an overview of what mentoring partnerships are and what those expectations are, the different roles. We talk about problem-solving scenarios, and one of my favorites is to share the scenario that I ask the mentors, both parties, how they would handle the situation. See what you think. This is a true story, happened early on in our mentoring experiences. 2 students were mentoring partners. One of them, she had volunteered an hour of her time every week to work with the student, and she really took the responsibility of the tutoring aspect of mentoring seriously. And she really wanted to help the student, but she knew she only had an hour a week to do it, and so by gosh, when they sat down together, they were going to get some work done. And so every time they had this mentoring, and together they figured out their schedule, and they knew what they were going to do, when they were going to meet. And every time that they would sit down, they would go to meet, the student that was receiving the academic mentoring support would come 15 minutes late, and he would come with a cup of Starbucks in his hand. Now, we happen to be fortunate enough to have a Starbucks on campus in the student union, so he would make a detour from the class that he was coming from to Starbucks to the building, which was the education building, where they had agreed to do their mentoring partnership. And he was late, and that kind of frustrated her, and she said, you know, Ryan, you really have to be here on time, that's important. And so he said, yeah. And they did their mentoring. And the next week comes by, and he's 15 minutes late, but he's got a Starbucks coffee cup in his hand. She said, Ryan, it's really important that you be here. He's going, yeah, you're right. And so the next week, same thing, another Starbucks coffee cup, 15 minutes late. The next week, the same thing. And at this point, now she's getting a little frustrated because he's not doing what she's asking him to do, and he's not taking this as seriously in her mind. She's not taking it as seriously as he was. Now, what's your first intervention idea that comes to mind when you think of that? Yes? Meet him at Starbucks, of course, absolutely. And so that became a really great learning experience for both of them. Now, let me tell you what happened before we got to that point, before she actually figured this out. She got really frustrated with him. I still don't know this has happened, okay? She's trying to deal with it on her own. Now, I'm not aware that any of this is going on. And she gets kind of mad at him. And she kind of lets into him, you know, as a peer would to a peer, like, come on, this is just, you know, you've got to value my time, and this is important. And she really let him have it. Well, after that, she felt really guilty. She didn't like the fact that she had done that. And so she came to me, and she said, Missy, I think I really screwed up. I kind of yelled at Ryan. I didn't like yell at him, but I told him, I let him know I was really, really upset, and I feel really bad about that. Well, the next week, then we problem solved together, and of course we came up with the idea that maybe perhaps you should meet at Starbucks. And so the next week he comes, and he's actually on time. And she said, oh my gosh, you're on time, that's wonderful, you listened to me. I guess the yelling wasn't so bad, you listened to me, it worked. But he also had a Starbucks coffee cup in his hand. And she said, but how did you make it here on time and still go to Starbucks? And he goes, oh, I just left my other class 15 minutes early. So we really talk about that situation because it's a true story. It's problem solving, right? He figured it out. But what that taught her as a future special education teacher is that you have to give people options and you have to from which to choose. You can't just say this is what you got to do without teaching people what those other options might be. Otherwise, you might end up with the different kinds of consequences. Although I think he did a great job problem solving. But we all learned so much from that particular experience. So we'd use those kinds of scenarios in our mentoring workshop or our mentoring orientation to try to help people think through what they might do in similar kinds of situations. We do have mentoring plans, and when we do the mentoring training, we try to make sure we figure out everybody's schedules. We look at what classes the students are taking, both sets of mentoring partners, who fits with what, and I don't do anything else to match them up. It's not about personalities, it's schedules, logistics. And then after that, they got to make it work. That's an important piece of it. And so we figure out who's mentoring whom, and everybody shares each other's phone numbers, and we collaborate and work together. And of course, all of the courses that are chosen are really based on a person-centered planning process that we use when people first come to campus, and we try to revisit every year if I keep up on it and I'm good about it. We want to revisit it every year, and mentors all come, past mentors, current mentors, whoever thinks that they have input to share. And kind of talk about what would be some activities we want to do, how to get them and get students meaningfully involved, and what they can do with that. Now, I say all this, and it sounds all great. We've got all this formal mentoring going on, but really, you got to really watch those kind of formal mentoring programs because they can undermine the natural supports that we were talking about that are really so important. If there is somebody in a class that's going to really help naturally with the student, and they're enrolled in that class and they're taking it anyway, they should be the natural supports. One more real quick story here. I was doing, I thought, a great job matching up a student with a peer mentor. I couldn't quite get the peer mentor there for the early orientation, so classes had already started. We had agreed that we were going to meet outside the door of this one person's classroom so that I can get them hooked up, and then I could be on my way, and they'd all be gone. Well, when I get there, Grace, the student who is in our supported higher education project program, was sitting there on the floor waiting for the professor to come, talking about the class, talking about the homework with a peer that was in the classroom. Exactly what you want to happen, right? So I walk over there and I interrupt them and stop the conversation and introduce Grace to the formal peer mentor that I worked really hard to put them together, stopping that whole conversation. And I killed that relationship when I did that. Because suddenly now I relinquished any kind of natural occurring relationship that was going to happen, and the student realized, oh, she's going to get help from somebody else, so I don't need to be a part of that relationship. And it wasn't really about helping. It was these two were talking together about the assignments the way you would expect students to do. So I kind of blew that. And you got to be careful of not allowing that to happen. I'm not going to tell you who in this big picture receives mentoring support. It doesn't matter. But one of them does. But she doesn't really want it or need it. She's in an acting class and she's in a group and they're talking about their skit that they're going to put on. So we have to learn when to back off, and learn when mentoring support isn't absolutely necessary. Now, just really quick for the last couple of minutes, just want to talk about what some of those common barriers are that you might have heard. So sometimes people say, like I have families say, well, can you guarantee my daughter's safety on campus? No, can't guarantee anybody's safety on campus. It's a part of that dignity of risk, of being able to be challenged by the things that we're confronted with and deal with it and problem solve and access the resources that we have. And I can't guarantee anybody's safety. Do I want everybody to be safe? Absolutely, but I can't guarantee it. Some people tell me that have mentoring programs, and I've talked to lots of folks around the country, it says we can't let peer mentors transport our students in their cars for liability reasons. And they look at me, do you let your peer mentors? I don't let or not let. If they have a relationship and they decide they want to go bowling or a movie or a play, that's on them. I didn't assign it. I didn't require it. It's nothing to do with my class. I told them they had to have fun. I didn't tell them how. I didn't say they had to go someplace. That's on them. So, yeah, I don't allow, but I don't not allow. It's not an issue. What is the liability for you to transport you someplace? It's the same liability. You have to have insurance. To me, it's a non-issue. The more we make it an issue, the more segregated our programs become. But what if he gets lost? Hopefully somebody will find him. Will someone be there with him at all times? No. And you have to be comfortable with that. Everybody has to be comfortable with that. The university folks, families, students, and it's good conversations to have. And in the end, what it's really about is, we can put all the supports in place, but the successes that people have, they own. They did it. And the more and I don't even want to say allow, because that assumes that they don't have that self-determination to begin with. But the more that we provide opportunities for people to explore their own independence, the more they can gain from the successes that they have, because they know that they did it. So that's just a little bit about the peer mentoring. And anybody wants to ask more about the program, I can share that at any time. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories with us and taking the time out of the work that you do. We have a few minutes for questions and comments. Dee's going to roam around the room with a mic, so just make a signal that you'd like to speak, and she'll bring that to you.
Mine's just more of a comment, and thank you everyone for your wonderful presentations. One of the things I got thinking about, and I actually can't remember who said it now, was the connection between being put through college and then having gainful employment after. And it started me thinking about how few students can actually expect the kind of gainful employment to come after they're finished their undergrad. So it's an interesting thing that we would expect that same kind of relationship for students with intellectual disabilities, especially because we don't expect that necessary connection for other students. So I just thought it was an interesting thing to think about. What we're really talking about here is how exactly do we envision the university as an institution in society. So I really appreciate all that. Just wanted to say that as a comment.
I do have one response to that. I used to get, when we first started, people would say, well, all right, fine, great, so they'll have this really great 4 years, but then what then? And I said, don't underestimate the value of a great 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, that's not a small chunk of a life. So,
well,
I mean,
and we can't expect, so the idea that we would then say to students with intellectual disabilities that they're not deserving of that same kind of edification, that same kind of process of, just learning, that's just discrimination.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's just discrimination. I'm sorry, Carter. Should I? I don't remember exactly what I said. The fact that we wouldn't expect the same for students with intellectual disabilities is discrimination.
And I like, you used the word edifying. That was good.
I use the word edifying.
I liked it. I wrote it down. I liked
She's a
it.
doctoral student, can you tell?
Sorry.
I'm gonna respond because I think that was my comment back in the program of one, and that one of the challenges was the cost, and that was my comment. But by no means did I not think that the value of that experience was not worth every penny and more. My point was that there isn't a lot of even financial aid packages out there for students with disabilities. So a program of one is very difficult without some extra supports and maybe some agreements with agencies and with the institutions for tuition waivers and audit tuition reduction. So, but yeah, I totally think well worth the money spent, and like Stuart said, any amount of time on the college campus was just one more natural experience for people with disabilities.
Let me just start off by saying thanks for all coming and sharing. They're all great stories. And this question's for all the panel members. How can we and everybody else who's interested implement programs like CCS at the College of New Jersey nationwide to other colleges, so individuals seeking those opportunities in the college experience can, have a chance to, succeed and have that opportunity. Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Well, I'm just going to go back to that idea that it doesn't have to be a huge program, and that you really can start with one family, one student, and someone on campus. And then see where it goes from there. And you can have a lot of ideas. I've known some great programs, I've known some great people who have developed on paper some wonderful programs that are very complicated with lots of detail and no students. So to me, it's not a great program until you get the people involved, and that's really the place to start. It's about people, not the grant, or I started without any grant money. You just did what, it doesn't have to cost a thing. It doesn't have to cost a thing.
Yeah, I mean, to continue on that theme that it's about people, you kind of need someone at the institution that's going to start the program who's a little bit crazy to do it. And it helps if they've got families who are interested, who are also sort of pushing them to do it. We have other programs in New Jersey and in eastern Pennsylvania. Like the existing programs are trying to help other people to start programs and to develop their programs. So there is that kind of networking that's happening now. Having a session like this helps. There are some conferences. But it's a lot of work. I know it. It's nice. It doesn't have to cost a lot. It doesn't have to be huge, but it does take a lot of work and a lot of vision and a lot of talking to anyone who will listen. And so hopefully now that it's not such a weird thing. Post-secondary inclusion. There's the website thinkcollege.net, which has a lot of information. So it's not so weird anymore, and it's not as hard to spread, but it's still I think you need the individuals, and some of the places where they've tried and failed, it's because somebody started it then left, that kind of stuff. So it's not perfect.
And I'll reiterate that as a family, the program that Jackie talked about that our two children were in, we had a champion, like Missy, we had a champion on campus that we worked with that had seniority on campus that helped us, helped our students audit classes, but he did leave. That's when things started to trickle down, when he left and went to another college, and that's when things started to fall apart for us. But if you have the families and you have one person on that campus, I think it's worth a try.
And for those of you who live in the Syracuse area, you're lucky enough our champion moved to a college close by. So I also want to just mention that I think that a way that would really help is to celebrate the successes and to let the general public know that there can be success in this area, because I do think people in the field And those of us who really care about this topic believe in it and know that it can happen and be successful and all the really good things about it. But if I talk to my neighbor who has no concept of even working with people with disabilities beyond knowing my daughter, or a concept of higher education and what goes into that, and knows about these programs, they still are struggling with the value of including people with disabilities. So I think that we still have a lot of educating to do of the general public and communities at large about the positive aspect of this experience for everybody.
Yeah. Just another comment on that. And this, I'm always embarrassed, well, since this happened, you know, to be the only person over the age of 14 who still watches Glee. But the fact that the Glee had an episode where they talked about post-secondary inclusive programs, and they actually showed a scene from an imaginary program at the University of Cincinnati.
It's not imaginary, they have it.
Oh, it's
a
real?
program.
I didn't know whether it was
It's
real or
not
not.
imaginary.
But so, I mean, that's pretty amazing to think that on a prime time national show, there was an episode that exposed the general public to the fact that this exists. I'm not saying, it doesn't look perfect to me, but.
It is somewhat of a segregated program,
Yeah,
so
it
that's
looks-
what was a little bit frustrating. But also as a special educator, I have to say, and I know you guys have heard this before, it's always better to ask forgiveness than permission. That's all I gotta say.
Hi there, I'm here from Syracuse University, and I work with Dee. And one of the things we're trying to do here at SU with peer partners is keep that relationship mutual. So it goes both ways. So we try to help the students understand the student with an intellectual disability will also support the student who's traditionally enrolled, that it goes both ways. But so often it seems like the assumption is that the person who's traditionally enrolled is going to get like intangible feeling things out of the relationship. I will learn a lot. I will, have warm feelings inside. This is a very special relationship. You know, I mean, those kinds of things, and that's fine. But it's very hard to push a little bit to have it be more concrete. But I'm thinking, for example, of a student who is traditionally enrolled looking for an apartment. And we had a student with an intellectual disability who had just done that. So she helped the student look for an apartment. But I was wondering if you could talk about anything that you do or any ideas you might have for building that idea of it being a two-way street.
We absolutely know the problem, and I mean, okay, yes, it's a huge problem, but I always think that it's better if people feel good because they did something good than if they felt good because they did something horrible. So the fact that there is some of that emotional gratification is not a terrible thing. But I do think over the years we have seen authentic friendships form just from the amount of time spent together. I actually do like the inclusive academic courses because then there's this shared experience, and because they're designed specifically to be inclusive academic experiences, everybody contributes and everybody's ideas are, at least when I teach a module in one of those classes, I try to always ask questions that everyone can answer, and everybody's answers will be interesting. And I think that starts to build some mutual respect. So being in a class together can do that. And then we have a fair number of students in our program who are in theater or choir, music, and those kinds of experiences are a place where they can shine. And when a lot of the mentors will go to see one of the CCS students in a play, then that builds the kind of relationship that you're talking about. So the arts can be good for that. So.
I hesitate. I want him to go first because I don't know the answer. I don't have any idea. Because I think it's a struggle. I think it's something that we all have to continue to work through. What I found is that the longer the relationship continues, the richer the dynamic of the relationship, the more likely that's going to happen. And I don't think that happens immediately. I think that, like we talk about collaboration being an emergent process, and I think friendship is an emergent process, and you can't just put two people together and say, be friends. And it's okay sometimes that peer mentors and mentoring partners don't get along, because that's also a natural part. If everybody liked everybody, then I think we were devaluing who people are. I mean, I remember I had a brother with a significant intellectual disability that passed away a number of years ago. So as a sibling, we have a whole different perspective. It's just a different perspective. And I realized that perspective actually when I was working as a recreation specialist at a place. And I had this person that I was supposed to take into the pool and do all this kind of therapy with, and the world had not been kind to him, his body. He was given a body that just didn't function, just didn't work. And he was meaner than a striped snake because of it. He was ornery. And I remember one day thinking, I don't like you. I don't like him. And at first I felt, oh, how could you say that? He has a disability, And I thought, no, that shows I value him as a human being. It's okay. He's ornery, he's nasty, he's mean. I cannot like him, but that means I valued him more as a human being. So sometimes I think you have to try to measure that as well, and it's hard to help people to see that that's true value. That's a non-answer for your very complicated question.
If I could make a comment about that as well, I'm Dee and I run the peer-to-peer project here at Syracuse University. We invited all of you folks to come and share tremendous stuff, and thank you all very much for that. I had a student, a non-traditionally enrolled student at Syracuse University who contacted me last year because she needed service hours for her church. I think she was going to be confirmed or something like that. She said, well, can peer-to-peer be my service project? I said, absolutely. I said, because you're working with, I said, it needs to be an education student who needs to get these hours. But yeah, if the student in the special education class is receiving service hours for working with the student with a disability, why would the student with a disability not be able to count that as service hours? And I thought that was really kind of an interesting flip.
Excellent.
And should anything ever come up, if well, I'm the one who's supposed to be helping, you're somebody's service project. You may want to, tamp down that I'm all that approach to things, because, and I will approach students who are non-traditionally enrolled before I partner them with education students and say, hey, they need to get their 20 service hours.
Right.
And last semester, 2 semesters ago, we had so many students. I had to call up all the non-traditionally enrolled students and say, could you take another one? We have all of these orphans. And finally, they said to me, Dee, enough, I've got class, I got to study and stuff like that. So I had to say to the traditionally enrolled students, sorry, they'll try to squeeze you in where they can.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful flip
I love it.
of the dynamic. That's terrific.
I love it.
I just want to comment that I think that anytime you can work out a win-win situation for all parties, it's great. And I think that Bud did that, the professor, when he allowed Bridget to use the experience with Rachel as a course credit for her experience in that class. But one of the things that strikes me about looking at the value of the relationship and building on people's awareness of that is to build in a reflective and evaluative piece to it. And it wasn't until Bridget and Tinker were asked to give us some support that they actually sat down and thought about what was the benefit to me and what did I get out of this. So I think that building in a piece where all parties need to reflect and evaluate, that's one of the things that we wanted as parents and families working with our students was everybody has to look at this, and it's only going to become better by evaluating how it's going and reflecting back on that.
I think we have time for one more question or comment before we wrap up.
Hey, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming out. Thanks Taishoff and Peer-to-Peer for hosting. I represent a local agency here in town, and we've been having conversations with a number of colleges about supporting students. One of the things that we do is we support students in inclusive classrooms across central New York. And it seems as though administration gets stuck in one of two details. One is that they sort of approach this in very much a charity-based model, and they see it as, they're offering a good to the community, which complicates our conversation a little bit. And then the second place they come from is, well, can they pay tuition? If they're gonna pay tuition, then yeah, it seems like a win for us. I'm just wondering, in your experiences, what sort of things have you heard that help move the institution forward and into a more respectful place?
Well, I don't know that this is what moves the institution forward, because that's huge. But because our students pay tuition, we use that as a way to remind folks of why they should have access to everything that everybody else has access to. If I were to make it a separate program, or if there was another way that was outside of the university, or if they had to pay something different than tuition, then people could use that against the inclusive opportunities that we want to create. Like someone once asked me, provost once asked me, well, what if they want to go to like career services? And I said, well, they'll walk over to career services and they'll, sit down and make an appointment like everybody else, but we're not trained for that. But they pay tuition, and so maybe people should figure it out. They know how to help people get jobs, and you know how to help people write resumes. What other training do you need? And so, I think it's being careful of how we set up the inclusive opportunities and how programmatic they look. That's different from what the rest of the students are doing. That keeps us in conversation. The more segregated people, it's easier for people to accept a segregated program for some reason or another. And it's easy for us to fall into the trap of creating segregated programs because it's easier to justify those in some people's minds. But I think that that's something we have to be really careful about. I haven't found that one thing that helps. It depends on the administrator and what his or her focus is. Like for one person, it was the tuition issue. For somebody else, it was the fact that the mentors actually, it helps them in their profession of becoming educators. No, I didn't think about that because they were thinking about it only for people with intellectual disabilities. So you kind of have to find out what their thing is. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. But I was going to start with our students pay tuition, and at first they didn't pay certain fees the first couple of years, and then we started getting those arguments like, how can they go to career services? They're not paying this fee. How can they go to the health services? They're not. So now they pay the fees. So that's part of it. But also every institution is different. So, like I said, joking about us being a liberal arts, we're really an old teachers college. We're the first teachers college in New Jersey. And as a teachers college, you can say our students here benefit from this. They learn how to communicate across a barrier. They learn how to communicate better. They learn how to teach better. I know that, say, George Mason, which is much more a research university, involved the students on campus in research projects. Tricky thing, but mutual kinds of research. So you have to look at the institution and say, what would they be wanting for their students, and how can we fit in with that? So it's worth.
And I actually absolutely think that we should pay tuition as well, because it's a spot. The college is all about filling their spaces and more, and filling more space. And I think that when my daughter started going through these experiences, there wasn't anything around. She's 30 years old now. This was a few years ago. There are grants out there to help support individuals with disabilities on college campuses. There are scholarships. All of this is starting to happen now, so there's a lot more funding options. There's family reimbursement programs through OPWDD. There's just different types of ways to brainstorm about this. But I think you'll also find that a lot of families that value this experience are willing to pay if they have access. If they have access, and I think access all comes about with the attitude of the institution, the college or university.
With that, I think we'll conclude our formal program and move into some informal conversation. Please feel free to stay. There's refreshments in the back. I think our panelists are sticking around for a few minutes. There's some books from the bookstore. And let's give another thanks to our panelists for coming in here.
What?
Hardest places are two-year colleges. Community college colleges. Because the student body is so, it comes with